Hey, Idea Jen. Thank you so much for having me again. I'm super excited to have a conversation today with a dear friend of mine, Deanna, about followership. Deanna, thank you so much for joining us today. So excited to have you. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. To get us started, can you share a little bit about yourself and your work? And you just launched Ever Unfolding. Can you also add in a bit of your primary mission?
Yes, I am delighted to announce that Ever Unfolding Life has been launched into the world, and it's a ministry of spiritual accompaniment and creativity for people and organizations on the journey to collective liberation. And I'm Reverend Deanna Vandiver. I have the great joy of serving as a community minister affiliated with the Church of the Larger Fellowship, Unitarian Universalist. And that has given me the opportunity to really pay attention to what's happening in the world, and look at how to, in this moment, receive what I believe is a global invitation to reimagine how we can human together better. So that has been a big part of my work right now.
I really like how you put that human together. That bit of humanity, I think, has at times gotten somewhat lost in the mix and the shuffle and the constant drive of information and this churn and this chaos. And to just be humans is such a pure, phenomenal concept. As you have worked to launch Ever Unfolding and you've been doing your work, what are some of the things, and we talked about this maybe just a couple of weeks ago about, what are some of the challenges that you've seen come up, or what are, people have sought you out to assist with them getting through these challenges and sorting through how to get through these, what are some of the predominant challenges you've seen for leadership today?
Yeah, lots and lots and lots of challenges, bearing witness. It is in this emergent universe and time, so many challenges. Two in particular that I think that I really want to speak to today, and one actually is arrogance, and one is exhaustion.
Mm.
And both of these challenges, arrogance, this belief sometimes that I know I'm the knower of all things and can make the decisions about all things, and then the exhaustion that sometimes comes with that. If I'm doing all the things, then I am exhausted. Or also just the weight of it, that feeling, as the sole person, as a leader in an organization, I'm the one who has to make it all work in these times. And I've never lived through a global pandemic before. I don't know how to do all these things.
Mm.
There's a lot of physical, mental, emotional, spiritual exhaustion in that. And which is why I'm excited to talk with you today about followership for leaders. I think it's a really important concept for us to spend some time with in this particular moment in the global history that we are living through.
Yeah, excellent. And so I'm not so certain I'm familiar with what followership means, especially as it pertains to someone who is coming from a leadership position or a perspective or seeking to help lead and guide. What are some of the attributes of followership?
It's for those of us who've been trained to be leaders, it's even hard to say sometimes. Followership, at its core, followership is trusting that other people, frontline communities, people with targeted identities, team members, your employees, that know their own truth better than you do. And followership as a leader is being willing to follow their wisdom in support of the mission of your organization. You cannot be the best knower of all things, and pretending to be harms the mission, and it exhausts you and the people around you, who have clarity about what is happening. I really want to thank the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond and the Beloved Conversations virtual within design team for really thought partnering with me on this idea around followership. It's an idea that has been alive in both the business world and the movement world. It pops up every few decades. We revisit it because it's good wisdom for leaders, it turns out. Sheri, I know that sailing is a joy for both of us. And I started learning how to sail over 2 decades ago on Lake Pontchartrain in New Orleans. And I learned very quickly that it was not fun to sail on boats when the person who had the tiller of the wheel, the skipper, the captain, didn't know the other positions. When the captain doesn't know how long or like how the jibe happens, and starts to yell at the person on the foredeck because why isn't it going well? It's not going well because you jibe too fast. Like you sucked all the wind out of my sail, right? And so, in this case, followership for leaders, that when the captain says, do you have what you need? Are you ready? The person who's on the front line, in this case, the front of the boat, can say, yes, I've had time to move this, I'm moving this around. So it really it changes the whole experience and how fast you go and how well you do as a collective, right? If leaders are willing to practice followership in these situations.
Yeah, so that's a really great analogy, and literally, figuratively, pun, no pun, sucked the wind out of my sails. It's true. Right. And I think that ties in so much with what you're saying about exhaustion, especially as we are starting to get closer to the end of 2021. And it just seems like yesterday was 2019 and then 20 was a blur. And now 21 is, almost over. And it's, yeah, exactly. And we're sitting here. I know I'm a particular shade of exhausted right now. And I think that really is, I think the point you're making about trying to carry on a burden that isn't necessarily yours, or understanding it, or that misunderstanding can take up energy that might not even be available for folks.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember as an emerging adult hearing a story about a teenager who had lost their contact lens. And I'm from a time when those were not disposable. when and it was, and he had looked all over, he didn't find it. And his mom came in and crawled on the floor for a few minutes and pulled it up. And he was like, how did you find that? And she said, you were looking for a clear piece of plastic. I was looking for $200. And so, right, like our motivations and our energy shift. And so really as a leader to really pay attention to like who is motivated in this space, who has a reserve around this, being able to follow that energy, follow that wisdom, I think is a real gift for leaders for organizations sustained and nourished in this moment. Pouring nourishment into organizations right now is what's going to keep us able to imagine what comes next. And maybe, we spend a lot of our collective and individual time imagining and preparing for worst case scenarios. And a really important piece of leadership is imagining also best case scenarios, like imagining what might be possible if everyone on this team felt witnessed and that their best self was being invited into this collective space. Imagine what's possible for all of us when that happens. I felt just a little jolt of energy just in that moment. I was like, "Whoa, I'm just not as tired as I was a half a second ago." It feels important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So for folks who might be somewhat familiar with this concept or not necessarily have the same framework to put followership in, because it helps to put some scope and bounds on these and make them concepts. And then once it's tangible and you have some sort of vision for it, you can apply it, and that application becomes easier and easier with practice. How does someone who is working towards getting even started in this space, how can they recognize where to even get started, or is there a little spot to get started, or how would one be able to take this concept and start to apply it?
Yeah, it's great. I'm often named as someone who begins in the middle and proceeds in all directions. So that is often how I roll. I was working with an organization when the pandemic began, March of 2020. And I remember just getting such clarity. Someone who had been able-bodied was suddenly diagnosed with COVID-19, and a member of this organization, they were like, I need help, I need an oxygen meter. And the person in this organization who immediately responded was someone who was on oxygen, was disabled, was greatly loved in the community, but not necessarily considered a leader. And they were a true leader in this moment. I have an extra one. Here's how you use it, all the things. So I think in a place to begin is just to really invite yourself as a leader to take a moment and imagine everyone you work with as a leader. It makes such a difference. And what I have noticed is that when we practice followership as leaders, when I as a leader acknowledge the wisdom that you bring into the room and incorporate it into the greater decision-making process, the people I work with start to develop really strong leadership skills, right? It's a real leadership development because then they start to model it in their cohorts and they start to model it in their cohorts, right? And suddenly it turns out that that leadership and followership are really important for each other and not as binaries, right? Like I'm not useful to an organization if all I do is follow around, really. I'm also not useful to an organization if all I do is order around, right? It really matters that we be able to understand how to bring our own wisdom and how to weave in the wisdom of others around us. And I think it transforms both the environment, it humanifies environments for working, and it opens imagination and possibility for organizations.
Yeah, that's those are interesting points. And the words that pop up in, I think first this set defined view on what leadership is, I think is almost outdated at certain points from the original, like leadership management style, what is leadership, and there's this idea of what a leader should be, and that varies, but there's an idea that it is something, and then it fits a specific definition. And I think that this is highlighting the necessity for change in what leadership even looks like today and how leaders are perceived. And I think that, another thought that popped up as you were saying this is effectiveness. I think it is in parallel with being effective of how are you being effective? Are you effective? Can you be effective? What can increase your effectiveness? And recognizing, like you said, like your usefulness, for being on one end of the spectrum versus the other, might not be as optimum. And as we get exhausted and we get super tired, we have to conserve that energy.
We get creative sometimes. We're very tired, but not always smart.
Yes.
Those are important things to pay attention to as well. Yeah. I do want to lift up that sometimes there's slow wisdom. And I think that's a thing that does get a little lost in this, in short term, and, what happened last week and what happens tomorrow depends on, like, there are some folks who laid some wisdom on me years ago that only now, decades later, I'm like, ooh, oh, that's what that meant. Right? Like there's some things that we grow into understanding. And so to understand that even as the assessment I make today of this group, when I look back in 5 years, I may have changed, they may have changed enough, but we might say, oh, you know what? Actually, taking this moment right here to take a break, that was super smart, because it did allow us to say, oh, what? Okay, are we in production for production's sake? Like, what is our mission again? How are we making the world? How are we making the world a more amazing place? How are we? So much of the work of leadership is that we're doing a thing while imagining a thing, living into systems that have existed for years and years. It's a multi-layered reality. And so it matters that we take some time every once in a while to just acknowledge the complexities that we're in,
Yeah.
I think I'm trying to remember the wise soul who said, make it as simple as possible, but no simpler. you know, that, and I think followership and leadership is a piece of this, you know, like if we simplify binaries of leadership and followership, then we made it too simple. So I think this is an invitation to really complexify our understanding in a way that is generative, and that will bring rest for a little bit and respect and affirmation in other ways, which re-energizes the system, you know, and there's systems need some re-energizing right now.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
An invitation.
Yeah, definitely. I like the point you bring about the rate of the wisdom acquisition, if you will. And we're in this space of instant information, instant answer. Let me Google it. Let me find this. Well, let me pull this up, or that was here. Or let me search, or let me do this. And we're, you know, it happens even when we're not even looking for it. And this inundation of information and answers, but they're not it's not necessarily even an answer. It's perceived as an answer. And so I think that that's a really great point you bring up about the rate in which you recognize the value doesn't have to be and won't necessarily even be on a set pace. And through that recognition of the followership, you almost create that space to enable it to grow maybe even faster than if you were trying to push through on your own.
Yeah, certainly getting through.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good point.
I was at a staff retreat for an end of the year when I was a director of an organization, and the facilitator had us kind of go through a process. And at the end of it, I looked at mine, and my summary basically was really heavy. Like I felt like I was holding all the things. And one of my coworkers was a summary, and she's given me permission to share that, you know, hers was like tending to land that is not my own, you know. And so we had a real moment of clarity in this, of looking towards each other and understanding, oh, we actually we did a major restructure of leadership in our organization and power sharing. We became co-directors, really shifted the energy of the space and place. Both of us instantly felt like more human beings, right? I mean, I felt like I wasn't holding everything by myself anymore. And her wisdom really was, you know, able to be witnessed by the community in a way that it hadn't been before. There's a lot of possibility in reimagining, in making that space. And I think just to believe, like, it can be better. I think sometimes when I'm deep in a thing and it's just all the time, like, right, you know, it's like 2 years of pandemic, just all the time, right? But I can imagine a time, right? I can imagine a time when we can travel freely. I can imagine a time when global public health is a thing. I'm going to imagine it. I'm here for it. Right? But that's because I'm clear I don't have to do it all by myself. Otherwise, the imagination is shut down.
That's a really great point of that, you know, that switching from the perspective of a solo burden to bear. We didn't get here by ourselves in the current state, good or bad.
Yeah.
It was a collective effort of this current state that we're in. I think that's a really good point of that, in that humanity piece of it that works through that. To pull on some framework and some definition, you know, when you say witnessed, what does that mean to you? Like, as you say witnessed, so that other folks can be able to apply this, because I think it's a really beautiful concept that I wasn't necessarily taking from that perspective until you would pop that into my life. And I think it's a really beautiful thing. And so can you share a little bit more about like that witnessing piece and how that ties into followership?
Wow, thank you. You know, I was working in New Orleans at a Center for Ethical Living and Social Justice Renewal, and this is when I first started getting really clear about the concept of witness, because volunteers would come to help rebuild the city, and sometimes people would tell them their stories of struggle, of harm, and I got real clear. I was like, your work in this place it's helpful to help rebuild. But your work in this moment is to really bear witness to what happened and to affirm, the humanity of this person in front of you who has gone through a thing, has survived it, is going to thrive again, maybe thriving now, right? But to really witness this moment, it both there's I think this has been part of our struggle in this 2 years of not being peopling together. Is we don't have, many of us, some folks do. Some people have spent their life studying this, I want to be clear. But in general, we are unconscious about how much we offer each other when we're peopling together. Like our cells recognize each other, it turns out. Who knew? Some amazing science. And just have to say, I give great thanks for it. It makes my world wondrous every day. And so there is a way that we offer each other witness that we can know with our whole beings, right? You know when someone is not paying attention to you, right?
Yeah.
It turns out we also know when we are being witnessed, right?
Yeah.
And it's such a different shift, and it changes how we respond. It changes what we can imagine next. It changes our postures. Are we defensive? Are we open? There's so much that happens when we feel truly witnessed. So much becomes possible. Whole new imaginations.
That's fantastic. That's really, and to tie maybe some familiarity for some of the folks who are watching, that presence, common theme for being present. Because I think often, we get in as folks who are leaders, and it's that, like you said, there's a layer of what you're working on, what's in front of you, what's currently being, what's in a queue, what was behind, and actually being physically present in that moment, I think is key and part of what you're saying. And then on top of that, having that mindfulness, I think having that awareness of, how are you in that space with that other person being human. I think that's a common, like some of the stuff to help tie and connect what other folks might be working on or learning about or researching or reading the literature and studying. I think that's common.
Yeah, thank you for lifting that up. I mean, even to come speak with you today, like I made sure I had my basic needs met, right? Because I wanted to be here and be present with you. I didn't want to be like, oh, should have taken that bio break, right? So I think it's a really important part of leadership is really are my basic needs met? Because in order for me to be really fully present with you, they have to be on some level. Either that or I have to make a conscious decision. This need hasn't been met. I'm going to acknowledge that. Maybe I'm going to tell you, I'm with you. I'm with you, and I have a friend in the hospital, so I'm waiting for a call. So I am with you in this present way, and there's a part of me that's not quite here, and this is why. And I think naming the things is one of the most powerful acts of leadership, right? I mean, I feel like there should not be elephants in the room unless there are actually elephants. That is a part of leadership as fellowship. Like followership is, okay, what is, like finding the dynamic, what is happening here? Here's the thing here's the, Brene Brown's, here's the story I'm telling is a powerful piece. Like the story that we're telling in this room right now is 5 people who are dedicated to making sure this product gets launched in time, because that means it will align with our partners who are doing this other thing, right? Because we have accountability, we have responsibility, we have connections in the world. If that's the story we're telling, then that's going to shift what we're doing and how we're doing it, rather than listen, sorry, Bob. Bob promised a thing and now we have to do it. Like that's a whole different dynamic.
Right? Absolutely.
And so that presence, that witness, that connection, and the naming of the things, I think those are all really important pieces. In followership for leaders.
I like the point you bring up about naming. A lot of, my personal passion is empowering women and girls, Sustainable Development Goal 5. And by seeing what's possible, you're able to not only get to that point, but then extend it further. And I think by being able to put a definition or to name it or framework around it and know the positive of what's possible, because as a project manager type person with risk management, worst case scenario, worst case, what catastrophic failure, how could this go wrong? Where could it go wrong? I don't nearly spend enough time on how could this go right? How could this go so incredibly right? What else could come and flourish because of how well it went? I don't spend nearly enough time on that. So I appreciate the emphasis and the reminder for my personal journey on sorting out how to be to support followership. Because if you can't if you don't give them the space to be great,
how can they unfold into greatness?
Exactly.
They might, but maybe not with you. So there's a lot of really importance for making space for the unfolding. I mean, we all are. There's a through line of Deanna, like Deanna who was 2. I remember her, and Deanna who is not 2 anymore has a whole different layers of context of the world, right? So much is unfolded that I did not imagine. On a naval base in South Carolina as a very young child. Like, they had no idea that followership for leaders would be a concept in my life one day. That was not a thing.
Yeah.
But it is, it is unfolding. And so we just, I think allowing ourselves the invitation to imagine what could unfold here. And not in the, Savannah, something's going to attack me, worry, which is that wiring we have, right? Our evolutionary wiring, like danger. Yes. Yeah. Also possible.
I've seen the bugs there. Plenty to worry about. I've been there.
And what I didn't imagine a global pandemic, but somebody did, right? Somebody prepared for that. Somebody also imagined a space station, I just, so much of the things I read in high school, I was a science fiction reader, and things happen today, and I'm like, I feel like I've heard this before, right? Somebody imagined it a couple of decades ago. And I think we get to be those imaginers too. It will make a difference.
Yeah, that's, I want to pull the thread on what you said, because I think it's really on the profound levels of, if you don't create that space for them, and if they are of that mindset to want to grow and to unfold into that best flourishing state, they won't do it with you, or they might not necessarily be doing it with you, that they're going to go find a space and an environment to go unfold into the next great thing. And I think that I think retention, I think followership is, talking with you now, is like that connection of, that's retention.
That's good. Two can go two ways, right? I've heard from wise people that people vote with their feet. That is a thing that can happen. I have also been in an institution where one day I heard someone yell in the halls, I only have 11 more years and then I am out of here. And I was like, oh dear. So that person is probably not going to unfold for the mission of your organization, right? They're marking time to go. So either way, you've lost the heart of possibility as a leader with those people. And so I think it's always, anytime it happens, it's an invitation to be like, okay, let's reflect.
Yeah.
What might we do differently next time?
Yeah.
But also, don't wait till it happens, dear leaders. Now is the time, right now, in this strange little global moment we're in, is the time to take a breath in and out and imagine, if I bring trust into this place and trust that this person knows their truth better than I do, what might I learn? How might our organization shift? What might be possible?
Excellent. Yeah. And I think that is so, the word that comes to mind is current. So it's so now, especially with the emphasis of the movements of the lack of diversity, the lack of opportunities, having that across the spread, and being a woman in tech, being a woman in engineering. I was just in a meeting this past week, and I was the only female engineer in this room of maybe 30 plus people. Mm-hmm. And it took a second, and I don't think about it because it's just a state of the environment. I had someone bring that up of like, where's the other women? And I was like, yeah, where are the other women? Uh-huh. Yeah. And I think that this is so what you're talking about, of that truth, and knowing that their truth is sound because it's theirs, and being open to enabling that to come in and create that feedback, I think it's current. It's right now and applicable to turn.
A friend who hired the first woman into their department, and that should not be a thing anymore, right? Like, yeah. What has your organization lost for the past decades? Because 50% of the world's wisdom has not been present for your organization. I think about like the global majority is female and non-binary. The global majority is brown and black. It's not, it's not white colonialism. It is, the global majority, it kind of it's painfully funny to talk about diversity and inclusion when a very small percentage of the world population has decided to be the leaders of all things, right? People are very carefully calling it diversity, equity, and inclusion. But if you call it diversity, inclusion, and equity, you can get clear that you will die if you do not open your hearts to the global majority. Like this, I will say white supremacy culture has been, it's been the destroyer of dreams for so many beloveds. It dehumanizes everyone, right? I mean, I think the piece that gets missed sometimes in the conversation is like the moment anyone is made an object or less than, everyone becomes objectified and less than. It makes all of us disposable, right? So any system that doesn't understand that there's value across the gender spectrum, across how we understand racial identities in this globe now with colonialism, all the things it's done, like to not understand that there's been a huge loss of possibility because we've all been dehumanized, the planet's been desacralized. I think it really, for me, it is the string that ties out, this is an incredible moment of possibility for folks who have historically been given the opportunities to be leaders, to practice followership.
That's a lot to unpack. There's a lot to unpack in that. And to tie this into my last question I had for you, and it's, what ways have you found for leaders practicing followership, and to encourage leaders to practice followership? What are some of the methods, mechanism, means, tips, Deanna pro tips to follow, if you will, of how to unfold, so that how do you unfold so that others can unfold themselves into the greater possibility?
Thank you for the space for that. I'm really grateful I've had the opportunity to be working with Aisha Hauser of Connect, Learn, and Grow on collaborative leadership for collective liberation, and to really go deep into how do we find ways to honor each other's gifts, find ways to honor each other's humanity, that allows us as human beings to thrive and grow. And what I am finding is that there's a need to speak for people who have access to power. There is often a lot of fear about loss. Like, this idea that power is pie, And if I give you a slice of pie, what happened to my pie? So here is the wonderful thing that has really helped me and so many others. Power is not pie, right? And or if it is pie, it's unlimited pie. It's like pi, like 3.1. It goes on and on and on. As long as you can. All my dear math friends out there. So we are. I think the practice for folks who have access to power, who have historically had access to collective power. I want to name all of us have access to individual power, and I want to bear witness to some powerful folks out there making things happen, no matter what systems of oppression are set up around them. Ancestors, elders, yelders, young folk doing community care, mutual aid, like making the world possible for so many people. And these conversations are sometimes long haul conversations. I remember working with a group. They came to the center for years, and every year they would have a fight, an argument about why they had to talk about racism if they wanted to help in New Orleans, And I was like, well, our partners are clear that we have to stop sending volunteers who don't have an analysis about racism, which is the nicest way I can say that to you, dear ones, and so we keep having the and every year a little, and then the 7th year they came, they're like, we really need to have this conversation about racism. And I was like, hallelujah. Like, I'm here for it. So I think a piece of it, as folks who are starting to unfold, is to make space for the unfolding. And sometimes that can be challenging. I'm thinking of all the ways it is challenging, and they all want to rush out of my mouth at once. So maybe I will celebrate that, but the gift of it, the gift of not giving up, right? The gift of unfolding is always possible, right? I don't give up on people. And that is important for this work. But I think that once you start to unfold, sometimes for some folks, there's a temptation to be like, oh, Sandra Kim of Rebecoming Humanesque, who did you have to become to be numb to the pain in front of you, right? And so once you to really start to address that and to bear witness to the pain, it's not just in front of you, then you start to go, oh, it's also inside of me, right? Because the system's dehumanized me too. And that starts to allow relationship, conversation, worldview, right? Like, I went from rural Georgia to a liberal arts college in Minnesota. And let me tell you, I learned something very quickly. There are a lot of more opinions about how the world works than the one I was raised with, right? It was transformational. And we're always invited into those spaces.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. I so much to unpack from this conversation myself. I look forward to the time to reflect on this and really some gems of content and some context and some better definition and to the naming of the things. Definitely really truly value that. And thank you so much. As we wrap up our chat today, is there any parting words that you would like to leave?
I do. I want to thank you. I just want to bear witness to the amazing work that you are doing across the world, and lifting up women and girls in this work, plus your own brilliance and your gloriousness. I want to celebrate. And I do want to name, joy does not wait for the struggle to be over. And I want everyone in this moment to just remember that as leaders, as folks who are struggling with your leaders, we can find joy in all these little moments. Just because something's hard doesn't mean it has to be awful. And so I invite us to remember that there can be joy in all of this unfolding. And I thank you for all the joy you bring into the world, friend. I'm super grateful to you and for you.
Thank you so much, Deanna.
Thank you.
Thank you.